Welcome to Sproutcast, where we speak with changemakers, social innovators, and entrepreneurs about how to make the world a better place. And now, here's your host, Julia Duffy.
Thank you for listening to Sproutcast. My name is Julia Duffy, and today we're speaking with Paul Towers, founder of Task Pigeon. We'll be chatting about the unique practice of transparency that he's been implementing in his company and the broader applications and implications it represents. We'll also talk about his long history of entrepreneurship, which began at the age of 16. Welcome to Sproutcast, Paul.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be on your podcast.
Awesome. So to begin, I wanted to ask you a little about your personal background, because I know you have an interesting history with entrepreneurship and with starting a number of companies. So yeah, if you could lead us through what's gotten you to where you are now with Task Pigeon.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, I guess a bit of a different path, to most kids my age when I first started. So I was 16 and I actually bought a retail surf shop. So I know a lot of people probably kind of go, oh, well, that didn't happen, or someone bought it for you, or that kind of thing. But I was actually pretty lucky. I was working at McDonald's. So back in the day, I was earning like $4.70 an hour. And then I got a job at a hardware shop where they didn't have a wage for anyone under 18. So I went from $4.70 to like $16 an hour. So it was like being on triple time every day. And I worked a lot. Like I worked Saturday and Sunday. And this is when I was like 14, 15. And managed to save a bit of money and dabbled in shares and a few bits and pieces. And then by chance, a business that was across the road from where I was working came up for sale, and it was a surf shop. And I wasn't a mad keen surfer or anything, but I'd always been interested in business. So started kind of negotiating and talking with the people and ended up buying that business for stock value only. And with it came 2 employees, a 70 square meter shop, and, a whole heap of stock that I had to sell and run.
Wow.
And I had that bit. Yeah. So it was pretty exciting, like obviously a bit scary as well, being 16 years old. But I guess one of the things that I've always appreciated about my parents is that they never kind of said no. They always just asked why. So as long as I had a good reason or it made like sense, they were happy for me to kind of do it. And obviously it was like my money, so they were all good with that. And I had that business for about 2.5 years, but being 100% honest, like I never saw myself like being a surf shop owner forever. It was an amazing experience, and I learned like 1,000 times what I would from a textbook and stuff, because, I was studying business and everything like that as well. After that, I did the usual. I went to university, but I worked at the same time. And then I decided to kind of start another business, and it was completely different. It was an online services-based business. We provided resumes and business documentation to people around Australia. And I started that from scratch, and, it wasn't a tech business, but it was kind of online based. So that was kind of my first, I guess, exposure to like online advertising and just the amazing benefits of being able to pay per click or per lead, essentially. I owned that for 3 years, and then I sold that business. And then I was kind of like at this point where I was like, well, tech's obviously the future, but I don't know tech. Like I'm not a technical founder. I can do a little bit of coding, but not enough to build anything of significance. And I was like, well, what's the easiest way to get into the tech scene? And the closest skill set I had was sales, so I kind of used that to get a role in the tech industry, but wanted to stay connected to the startup space. And I created a free newsletter called Startup Soda, and I just summarize the 10 best articles from the local startup scene each day, and I send that out, and I do that completely free of charge. And that's one of the best things that I've ever done. The amount of people who I've got to know in the startup ecosystem from doing that's been amazing. And a lot of people have been willing and eager to help and give feedback basically in return. And that really kind of speaks to my ethos of helping other people before I ask for help.
It's also a great newsletter. I've only been subscribed for a couple of weeks and I've really been loving it.
Oh, cool. Thanks. I'm glad you are subscribed. Yeah, look, it's a personal passion as well. I love reading the news. I love keeping up to date, and I think it's really important. So I was like, well, I'm reading all this stuff. I might as well just summarize it. And yeah, it was kind of like also, I guess, switching the lens and kind of like, why else would you do it? I'm not really good at networking. Like if we were in a networking event, I find it hard sometimes just to go up to random people and say hi. But this is kind of like my networking hack. I get to meet people just through this newsletter, and it's been amazing. But eventually, like I wanted to do, a proper company in the true sense of the word. And really, I started Task Pigeon to solve a personal pain point of my own, which was how I manage my tasks. I tried all different tools, pen and paper, Excel spreadsheets, various other applications, and none of them quite suited how I like to work. So started on this journey to build Task Pigeon. Big believer in validating ideas. I don't believe in kind of like jumping headfirst into something, spending a whole heap of money only to find out that no one actually wants it. So I went through this whole process of seeking feedback, trying to uncover if there was anything there in my initial hypothesis, and then trying to pre-sell licenses and taking a very staged approach on that front. And, that all started checking out. So I found a developer, brought him on board. We built out the beta version of our software in 7 weeks, and then we launched, and we've been in the market probably about 3 months now, 2 or 3 months with our live version. But I guess as part of that journey to kind of bring it full circle and, mention about why I'm so passionate about giving back, I'm building what's some people refer to as like a transparent startup. So essentially that just means that I'm documenting my journey to build this company from day one. That includes sharing revenue metrics, traffic metrics, the ups and downs of the business as and when they happen. So that's essentially me in a nutshell.
Excellent. Yeah. So I really wanted to go into more depth on this idea of transparency. And I guess you've kind of touched on it, but why you would do that in a business? Because I know you're not the only one. There's been a couple of other examples. Have they kind of done it for the same reason? Have people seen benefits so far? Yeah,
certainly. So there are a couple of startups that I take a lot of inspiration from. Buffer, Groove HQ, and Bear Metrics are kind of three that I often refer to. And look, being 100% honest, there are reasons to do this from a commercial sense. Buffer, for example, do credit their transparency in their blog posts with one of the main reasons why they were able to get like 1 million customers or 1 million users. I can't remember the exact figures. Alec, who is from Groove HQ, again, writes quite openly that by being transparent, he's been able to get a lot of customers as well because other startups become aware of your tool or what you're providing. So look, there was certainly an element of that as well. I thought it would be a great story to tell. But I think going deeper, I've always had a passion for writing. I enjoy reading, as I mentioned with the newsletter. But often with startups, you find that history is kind of written well after the fact. So, you hear about all these amazing founders or amazing companies, and it can kind of seem like every single step or every single decision they made was the right one. But really that wasn't the case. They just happened to make the right decision at the end when it counted. So I thought, I might as well share the story from the beginning and try and be raw and honest so that other people who are potentially either thinking of starting a startup or have a startup themselves, they don't just look at all these people who are having massive success and kind of go, gee, I'm failing because I've only got 3 customers, right? Like that's completely normal when you're first starting out. Like you've got to have your first customer. So yeah, that's basically it, the main reason anyway.
Could you lead us through maybe, I guess, how your everyday kind of decisions that you make in the company are different because of this transparency, and what stages of the work that you do the transparency is involved?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's actually a question that a couple of other people have asked me as well, because it's like, at what point does transparency begin and end? And for me, I'm really making a conscious effort that everything is transparent. So if you really want to, you go on my blog and you can leave a comment and literally ask me anything and I will answer it. I think it is hard, it's not easy. I've just been drafting up a blog post today that I'm going to put out about a goal that I'm setting for the business to try and get 25 daily paid active users. So just to provide some context around that, we do have paid users at the moment, but they've all come from like a one-off or upfront licensing model, whereas our long-term goal is a reoccurring subscription. So that's this goal that I've set, and I've set it for 6 weeks. And I think it would be very easy for me not to publish that post. And just in 6 week time, if we have 10 users or 15 or whatever it is, say, well, that was the goal and yippee, we hit it. But then that wouldn't be true to myself. And I think, again, that would kind of be painting that false picture for other startup founders. So in terms of my day-to-day kind of thing, I judge everything I do by is this pushing the company forward? If there's an interesting story to tell around transparency or what's happening, I'll tell it. Even if that potentially means there's a slight negative connotation or association with it initially, right? Like, I put this blog post out and people are like, oh, gee, you don't even have normal paid customers yet. They're all just advanced customers. Potentially some people would see that as a negative. I'm sure there are some, but I do just feel deep down like, well, I might as well tell the truth. Otherwise I'm just lying to myself essentially.
In addition to other people learning from the lessons along the way and the insights of your transparency, do you think it's helpful to how you're running your business? I guess you gave us an example of that just now, but do you think it's helpful in a way that's not just to you kind of personally, but possibly applicable to a lot of other businesses in a broader sense?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard. I think it would be obviously most applicable to other startups that are kind of starting out, because obviously they can kind of see how the journey's unfolded and that kind of thing. I also like to think, and this is something that I'm not 100% sure of at this stage, but I think we've certainly seen a shift in how consumers and how businesses choose to spend their money. And there may be some benefit that they see in, like, I'd much rather buy from a company who's open and transparent and honest about how they operate than one that isn't. Like, I know, for example, going back to Buffer, I first heard about Buffer through their transparency and through the blog posts that they were putting out. And when I needed a social media scheduling tool, I didn't compare prices. I didn't compare even product features. I just went and bought Buffer because I fundamentally believed in their journey. So I'm not sure yet at this stage, but a hunch tells me that potentially there could be something like that. I guess just like, people who like to buy organic fair trade food or those kind of products, you're paying that premium, or you're not just buying that brand because their chocolate tastes good. You're buying it because you believe in their mission. And I know it's kind of hard to translate that to software, but I do feel there is a sense where some people will just buy into the journey and kind of back you because they believe in what you're doing as a person and a company.
That kind of leads me in, I guess, to potential applicability of this idea to, I guess, social enterprises and NFPs, because I guess there is a perception that they should be transparent in some ways like this,
sure.
and that would be a good thing. I guess my sense is that there perhaps would be some hesitation in these organizations that what they actually look like from the inside is perhaps different from consumer or community expectations. So I've wondered if you've had any pushback or any kind of concerns about pushback about what people are seeing on the inside of a business not being what they expected. And then I guess, your thoughts on how that might be relevant to the social enterprise or NFP space.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I haven't had any pushback or anyone kind of say, oh, you're not being transparent enough or anything. And I think that kind of comes back because I started this journey being 100% open and honest. I think if I did it as an afterthought, maybe 6, 12, 24 months down the track, maybe people would be like, well, now you're just trying to jump on that train. I'm a big believer of it for social enterprise, actually. I have a number of causes that I'm really passionate about outside of work. And one of the things that, I always look at when, if I'm donating money or supporting a cause or a charity is, how much money is actually going to the people who need it, like instead of just admin and overheads. And look, I certainly understand the need to have professional people employed and everything like that. But I think there's a real opportunity for charities or non-for-profits to differentiate themselves and talk a lot more openly, because really their customers are everyone. Like, anyone can donate to a charity. And if I had a charity or a not-for-profit that was kind of sharing what they really wanted to do, how they really operated, and not just kind of sharing the glossy statistics, I think I'd be much more likely to back them. I understand the hesitation though around it. It is a difficult thing to do, especially if you're a more established charity, to publish something like, very openly or on a very granular basis. Like if a project went wrong, for example, like let's say a charity is like, oh, we're going to raise all this money and try and create something or feed some amount of people or teach, people who've been long-term unemployed some new skills, and they invest a whole heap of money that they've raised and then that doesn't work out. Yeah, I can certainly see why people would be hesitant from that. But one of the things that I've really seen from being transparent is that people are drawn to the message of transparency. So just yesterday, actually, I had a guy, I don't know him. I don't know how he found out about me. He just saw one of my posts, and he's a CEO or ex-CEO. He's had a couple of companies, a few of which were listed on the ASX, and he just messaged me and he said, I'd love to have a chat. And we had a really interesting conversation about startups, and he basically said at the end of the conversation, if I can help you in any way, just give me a call whenever you want. And that's a contact that I never would have had. So I think charities or non-for-profits could find similar benefit. You don't know. There could be a benefactor out there or someone with a particular skill set or connection who just doesn't know enough about some of these organizations but could really help if they just only knew how.
Excellent. I guess it potentially could have the benefits that you spoke of earlier of kind of pushing the organization to improve its business practices or to be more efficient due to the fact that people are going to be aware of what they're doing potentially. So it could be motivating in that way. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I certainly agree. I mean, not that I like to draw a correlation or a link between politicians and charities or anything, but when politicians don't think they're going to be found out, they kind of a little bit more laissez-faire with the money, take helicopter rides or private jets instead of the cars. And I'm not saying charities do that, but it does put things into a different lens. If you know you're going to write about it and share about it, perhaps you do just sit down and think a little bit more. Are we best spending, that money that we've raised in this area? Or could we potentially help more people doing a slightly different program or taking a new and fresh approach? Look, to be honest, I don't think if you are open from the start, I don't think people will punish you if you do get it wrong. Everyone gets things wrong every now and then. We can't be right all of the time. But if people know that the intention's right and you really tried hard to achieve whatever you set out to achieve, sure, it might not work out 100%, but next time you've got all those learnings and all those lessons, and if you can show improvement, then over time, I think you'll get more people backing that cause or that charity.
Now, I wanted to kind of go into more detail about the specific information that you're sharing, what data and what kind of specific lessons you think people are learning from it, just so I can understand a little bit more kind of what people are gaining from the information you're putting out there.
Yeah, certainly. So I think, going back to the start of Task Pigeon, it was primarily operations focused or getting started. So everything from how I tried to test and validate the idea to the actual feedback that people gave me, that was a real big one actually. I literally cut and pasted comments that people emailed me, and I was very deliberate in that post to say, here's the good ones, here's the bad ones, and here's the really, really ugly ones. Because again, it would be easy for me to cut and paste the positive quotes and plaster them all over the website and say, look, everyone thinks we're wonderful, but that wasn't true. And that's never going to be true for any startup. Even some of the greatest startups that exist today, like Uber, Airbnb, there was tons of very smart people and very rich investors who said that idea is stupid, it's never going to work. So you can't I don't think you can't take any one person's opinion seriously, but obviously if you see a trend, then you have to take that all into consideration. So that was it kind of initially starting out, the operations side of things. Then as I kind of moved into development, building the software, I wrote a lot about trying to find the talent that you need, like a technical co-founder or developer or contractor, whatever decision or path you choose to take. In Australia, that is quite a big issue for a lot of startups, especially people who are perhaps, a little bit older or kind of miss out on this STEM skills focus that's currently kind of running through universities and high schools and stuff. It can be very daunting. You might have a really great idea, but if you don't know how to execute it or don't have the technical know-how, it's hard to know where to start. So I hope that I'd encourage some people through that. And then more recently, now that we've kind of got customers and we've got money coming in the door, I'm sharing more of those hard metrics. So things like, traffic stats, revenue stats, user stats, that kind of thing.
Excellent. And is this different from what Buffer and some of the kind of older organizations doing the same thing are revealing? Have you kind of noticed different trends there?
Yeah, look, so Buffer's very open. They share everything, including employee salaries, which I'm open to doing as well. I'm not against that. There is a spectrum though. So, and I don't think that there's not a right answer or wrong answer. I just believe in the kind of idea of openness and transparency, and what that looks for one organization may be different from another. But if you're more open than traditional stuffy corporates, then I think that's a win. So, if some companies are only comfortable sharing, traffic numbers, but not revenue numbers, okay, that's a start. Baremetrics, they actually build a tool for sharing revenue. So there's a ton of companies, if you go to baremetrics.com, I think it is, and they've got a tab called Open, and there's just like a revolving door of tens, if not hundreds of different startups, everything from companies that are making like $5 a month to hundreds of thousands that are kind of sharing those statistics. So I don't think there's been a trend one way or another. I just think that at the end of the day, founders or companies are kind of making a decision on where they feel comfortable about what they want to share. And some are obviously a little bit more open to sharing more data than others. If any organization listening to this is thinking about adopting transparency or trying to be more transparent, you want to bounce off ideas, I'm always open and happy to chat and share my experiences kind of one-on-one, so to speak. So people are more than welcome to reach out if that's a topic of interest to them.
So I wanted to take this opportunity as well to talk about, you mentioned at the top, your kind of long history of entrepreneurship. And so it would be great to interrogate a little bit what those experiences were like for you and perhaps what other founders could expect when starting something, whether it is a business, a social enterprise, or even just kind of a smaller stage project. So perhaps if we could start by chatting about when each of these things kind of first started, how did you know that that was the idea that you wanted to follow through on? Because everyone has a lot of ideas. How did you know when and why to take it to the next step?
Yeah, certainly. Might be slightly controversial comment, but I do believe that entrepreneurs are born, not necessarily made. I think your upbringing and that kind of thing obviously does have an impact, but deep down that I think fundamentally you either love it or you don't. And I've never viewed anything that I do that's my own as work. I just genuinely love it. Like I get excited about getting up to work, like literally every day. I get excited if I'm working till 1 or 2 in the morning on my projects. So I think you really need that level of passion to start. And then when it comes to the idea, often, you're right. Like people have so many ideas, like where do they start? And being completely kind of true and honest, like before Task Pigeon, 2 other ideas I had failed to even really get off the ground. So I think when it's the right idea when you just keep coming back to it. Like you might have 10 ideas one day, but then the next day you just think of that, just one of them. And then the day after you think of it more and more. And then all of a sudden you're like, Jesus, I really need to do that idea because I can't think of anything else now. And that's typically how I kind of know what to do.
You mentioned testing and validation earlier. What does this kind of research process look like for you?
Yeah, certainly. So that obviously follows on from the idea, right? Like, you can have a great idea, but that doesn't mean anyone else thinks it's great, or it doesn't mean it has the potential to generate any revenue. We've seen over the last few years, like this common approach of throwing up a landing page, trying to collect email addresses and then saying, hey, look, I've got hundreds of emails. It must be a great idea. That is a little bit of a misunderstanding, or a little bit of it's taken slightly in the wrong context, because getting someone's email address is a lot easier than getting their credit card details. And whether you're a charity or a business that's trying to make a profit, it's the credit card details that give you that, not the email address. So typically the way I approach it is I do start with the emails. I do start like reaching out, first of all, to my network so that I can refine how I'm selling the idea, like in terms of the landing page, the images, that kind of thing. But you can't really trust that advice too much because they know you and they could just be being nice. And then you progressively want to reach out to people who are further and further away from you until you're talking to people who've never heard of you before. And from that, you can kind of pick up a general sense if there's something in your idea. And that's certainly kind of what I did with Task Pigeon. And that's really kind of led to that central hypothesis that I have, that there's not a one-size-fits-all approach when it comes to task management. And we're trying to obviously solve that with what we're doing with Task Pigeon. But then to take the next step, it's like, well, how can you try and pre-sell the idea? Is there any way you can go and it depends on the market, if it's a software tool or if it's a physical product or if it's a new food product or whatever it is, like how can you get out there and try and just get 1 or 2 people to buy it or sign a contract to buy it when it's live or ready to go. And it's extremely hard because you're trying to sell something that doesn't exist. And even platforms like Kickstarter have really changed how they operate these days. So when Kickstarter first came out, like, you could basically just throw up some images and a nice looking video and potentially raise money. But because so many projects failed to get off the ground, there's now like criteria that they look at to make sure you're at least at like prototype stage, and, you know, you've kind of got the technical expertise or the backing to actually get it done. So when you do this kind of like pre-sale thing, and I've written about this on my blog, you know, don't expect to have like hundreds of people pay you or something, but literally just getting a handful of people to say, yeah, here's some money, that is worth 1,000 times as many emails. Following on from that, the last thing that I would mention is I'm a very big believer in figuring out how you can then get something to market for the smallest investment possible. Because if you go and blow all of your money on that idea, even if you've validated it somewhat and then it doesn't work out, then you've got no more, you know, you've got no more shots left. You can't have another go potentially. So if you can go, you know what, I can get something to market relatively cheap, I can test it, and then look, if it starts catching on, yeah, it's a little bit harder because you've got to like work like crazy to keep up. But at least you've kind of kept some money in reserve if it didn't work out as planned.
Now, you mentioned earlier that you have this newsletter and kind of some advisory work. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that startup community that you're a part of and how people can tap into those types of networks, or maybe what you've experienced about the type of support that's out there.
Yeah, certainly. The number one thing I would say is you have to provide value first. And people say this all the time, whether it's at networking, you know, like how to network, how to, you know, even how to sell stuff or whatever it is, like provide value first, but very few people actually do that. Everyone just wants a quick win. Like, so you can go on like startup groups on Facebook or various websites or whatever, and there's always someone asking someone for saying, hey, I want help with this, I want to do this, I need a tech co-founder, but all I've got is a piece of paper with an idea on it. But if you actually provide value first, then people, and anyone can provide value. It doesn't really matter, like even if you have no skills, like if you're fresh out of high school, you've never done anything before, there might be a startup out there that's made a new consumer app. You can reach out and say, hey, I'd love to test it for you and give you some feedback. I think that I'm in your target market. You know, I'm an 18 or 19-year-old guy or girl, and, you know, it looks like your product's trying to target to me. Or, you know, if you do have some skills, you know, you're a marketing person, maybe you say, hey, I'd love just to take a look at your marketing campaign and provide my advice and feedback. If they're a brand new early stage startup with like 1 or 2 employees, they will take it. They will listen. They will appreciate the help. So that's really what I kind of did with Startup Soda, is like, how can I provide value? I'll just start sharing really interesting, awesome news. And then from that, because I had my bio at the bottom, a few people started reaching out and saying, hey, I saw you've kind of had a few businesses in the past. I'm new at this startup gig. I'd love to have a chat. And I'm always completely honest. Like, if you're a brand new, never launched a business before, I can help you in some way. But if you're trying to raise a Series A or, you know, a heap of investment money, like, that's not something I've done yet. So I'm not the right person for you. But I'll certainly help try and find you the right person. So through doing this, and if you do take that approach, you'll just find that people are happy to help. Like, I mean, just the other week, I reached out to someone who I've met once or twice face-to-face. They run a coding school here in Australia. And I just said, hey, man, I really need some help. I need to talk to someone who understands this piece of technology. He's like, I know just the guy. I'll put him in touch. And I had a 45-minute, hour-long chat with this guy whose resume is one of the most impressive resumes I've ever seen in my life. And, you know, he helped me for free. And he doesn't even know me. He's never met me. But he helped me because he knew that his mate who was referring to me would only refer someone who really, you know, deserved that help. So I guess that's in a nutshell, like, help first and then ask later.
Awesome. Now, winding up, I wanted to check in on whether you had any kind of final advice, words of wisdom or caution for anyone who might be thinking of starting their own company, their own enterprise, something like that.
Yeah, definitely. I think if deep down you know that that's what you're meant to do, you just have to do it, because otherwise you will never feel kind of satisfied. I've been through periods where I was like kind of not struggling with life, but struggling with how I was kind of approaching certain things in my life. And it was because I wasn't doing what I really needed to be doing, like what I really loved. So if it's what you really love, find a way to do it. But in saying that, you know, there are smarter ways of going about things. So try and test the idea, try and validate the idea. Try and scale into the idea incrementally. You know, don't just dump all of your life savings in on day one. and then burn it all and find out a few months later it didn't work out. So take that scaled approach. And I think just just immerse yourself in the ecosystem, start providing value, because I started this journey 2 years ago in terms of the newsletter and stuff. I knew no one in the startup ecosystem in Australia. And now I would probably got 40 or 50 people who I know I could email or text message or talk to on Facebook and say, I need help, and they would give me help or lend their advice. And that just comes through time. So the sooner you start, the bigger and the better your network will be. And yeah, I really encourage anyone to just give it a crack if that's really what they love.
Awesome. And speaking of making connections and networks, I always like to give people the opportunity to give a shout out to someone, a person or an organization who is doing something really awesome that you're impressed by and you think people might be interested to know about.
There's a person who I was introduced to, and we've only spoken on the phone. Her name's Holly Steffens. She's created a networking group called Triangles, or heytriangles.co, I think the address is. Just Google Hey Triangles. And basically it's a network for women who are looking to get into business, looking to start startups or small businesses. And I really think, obviously there's a big push in certain sectors, and there needs to continue to be a big push to, increase female participation in entrepreneurial roles and startup roles and, senior management and board of director levels. And people like Holly are kind of leading that light. So I'm a big believer and firmly encourage anyone who can lend advice or help other females get started as well. It's a great organization to check out and lend some support to.
Awesome. And where can people find you or find Task Pigeon or find your newsletter online?
Yeah, no worries. So our newsletter is just startupsoda.com.au, and then Task Pigeon, our website's taskpigeon.co, and you can check out our blog there. That's where we share all of our kind of transparency and openness. My contact details are on the website. Anyone can send me an email. You will find me on LinkedIn. You'll find me on Facebook. You'll find me on Twitter. My contact details are pretty easy to find, but if you can't, it's just Paul, Paul, at taskpigeon.co. Send me an email. I'm literally happy to chat and help out anyone I can, whether that's a social enterprise or someone who's looking to get into business for profit. If I can help in some way, or you just want to talk about what you're planning to do, send me an email.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me on Sproutcast today, Paul. It's been really interesting talking to you.
No worries. Thanks very much for having me.
Did you enjoy this episode of Sproutcast? Visit sproutcast.net to sign up for our newsletter. The newsletter includes copies of the show notes and additional content from each episode.